Montana Territory, winter of 1887. I was standing on my porch at first light when I saw him, half-dead Marshall dragging himself through 3 feet of snow, wolves circling like they smelled their supper coming. Any sensible woman would have bolted that door and let nature take its course. But I reckon sense left me the day I buried my husband and little girl in empty coffins. The townfolk called me a witch for staying out here alone. Said a woman who wouldn't remarry or sell her land had made some kind of devil's bargain. Maybe they were right. 'Cause I saved that dying lawman, and he brought hell itself to my door. By spring thaw, one of us would be dead, me or the man who'd burned my family alive 3 years past. Turned out, sometimes the only way to bury your ghosts is to dig 'em up first. Part 1, 750 to 800 words. The marshal weighed more than a full-grown elk, and about as cooperative. I dragged him through my cabin door just as the alpha wolf made another run at us. My rifle shot split the frozen air and the beast yelped back into the trees. 4 pairs of yellow eyes watched from the darkness, patient as death itself. "Don't leave me," the stranger rasped, blood soaking through the tourniquet I'd tied around his thigh. His face had gone the color of old snow. "Wasn't planning on it," I said, though God knows why. 3 years I'd lived alone on this lake, and I preferred it that way. No questions, no pity. No townfolk whispering about the widow who'd lost her mind along with her family. I cut away his trousers. The wolf had torn clear to the bone. Without my yarrow poultice and honey salve, he'd be dead by morning. My hands moved from memory, the same way they'd moved over Robert's broken arm, over Lucy's scraped knees back when touch meant something besides survival. "Name's Ethan," he managed. "Ethan Wolf." "Ironic," I said, stitching. He screamed once, then passed out, grateful for small mercies. It wasn't until I'd cleaned him up that I saw the badge. U.S. Marshal, Dakota Territory. Half broken, like whoever tried to destroy it had given up halfway through. When his saddlebag spilled open, I found the newspaper clipping, 3 years old, edges worn soft from handling. Suspicious forest fire claims multiple lives near Montana-Dakota border. My hands went cold. The photograph fell out next. A young woman, dark-haired, eyes that could have been my own staring back from the page. On the back, someone had written, Isabella, 1884. I sat there on my cabin floor, the wounded marshal bleeding onto my good quilt, holding a picture of a woman who looked enough like me to be kin. And I knew, the way you know winter's coming by the smell of the air, that this man's arrival weren't no accident. The wolves howled again, closer now. 3 days the fever burned through him. He called out for Isabella in his delirium. Called out about flames and failure and things he should have done different. I spooned broth between his cracked lips and changed his bandages and tried not to listen too hard to a dying man's confessions. On the 4th morning, I woke to find him watching me. "You should have left me," he said, voice rough as tree bark. I poured water into a tin cup. "Maybe, but I didn't." He drank deep, studying my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "How long?" 4 days. Storms passed, but there's 3 feet of snow outside. You ain't going anywhere till that leg heals." He tried sitting up, winced. You need to rest." I cut him off. "Unless you want to open that wound and bleed out after all my hard work keeping you alive." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, ma'am." The knock at my door made us both freeze. I grabbed my rifle, motioned for Ethan to stay quiet. Through the window, I recognized Doc Montgomery's bay horse, the doc himself stamping snow off his boots on my porch. "Grace," he called, "brought those medicines you asked for." I cracked the door open. Samuel Montgomery had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a salt and pepper beard that made him look older than his 50-some years. One of the few from Echo Ridge who still visited regular. His gaze slid past me to where Ethan lay. "I see you have company." "Injured traveler," I said. "Found him being attacked by wolves." Samuel stepped inside, setting his medical bag on my table. Christian duty to help, of course. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mind if I take a look? Professional curiosity." I hesitated. Something in his voice made my spine stiffen. But I'd known Samuel for years. He delivered Lucy, treated Robert's broken arm, been the one to tell me gently there was nothing could be done after the fire. Fine, I said. He examined Ethan's wounds with practiced hands. Fine stitching. Your poultice is keeping infection at bay. He looked up. He's lucky you found him. Will he live? Ethan asked dryly. Samuel chuckled. With Grace's care? Absolutely. Though you won't be walking proper for a month, at least. He repacked his bag, then motioned me outside. On the porch, his expression went serious. Grace, you should know, Hammond's men have been asking questions in town about strangers passing through. My blood went cold. What kind of questions? The kind that make me think they're looking for someone specific. He glanced toward the cabin. Your guest, you know who he is? Said his name's Ethan Wolfe. Samuel nodded slow. Just be careful. Hammond's more determined than ever to get your land. And having a strange man staying with you? He trailed off. It'll give people something to talk about. Let 'em talk, I said. They always do anyway. After he left, I stood on that porch, watching his horse disappear into the trees. Behind me, through the window, I could feel Ethan's eyes on my back. I had questions for him. About that badge, about the newspaper clipping, about the woman in the photograph who looked enough like me to be my shadow. But first, I needed to understand why Victor Hammond, the timber baron who'd been trying to buy my land for 3 years, was suddenly interested in wounded strangers passing through my territory. The wind picked up, carrying the promise of another storm, and somewhere in those trees, the wolves were still watching. Days bled into weeks, and the cabin that had been silent as a tomb for 3 years started filling with the sound of living again. Ethan healed slow but steady. At first, he was just a quiet presence by the fire, watchful, withdrawn. But gradually, as strength returned to that torn-up leg, he began helping with small tasks. Whittling kindling when his hands grew restless, mending my traps with knots I'd never seen before, teaching me to braid leather cord so it wouldn't fray come spring thaw. I found myself listening for him when I came back from checking my trap lines, anticipating the sight of smoke rising from the chimney as I crested that final hill toward home. The cabin seemed less empty, with his deep voice occasionally breaking the silence, asking about my herbs or commenting on the weather. This yarrow, he said one evening, holding up a dried bundle. It's what kept me from losing the leg, ain't it? That and honey, I said, stirring the rabbit stew. Old medicine woman taught me. Townfolk think it's witchcraft. Townfolk are fools. He set the herb down gentle, like it was something precious. You got more healing knowledge in your little finger than most doctors got in their whole practice. I felt my face warm and turned back to the stew pot, uncomfortable with praise. Been too long since anyone saw me as anything but the strange widow on the lake. He never asked about the wedding band I wore on a leather cord around my neck, though I caught him looking at it sometimes. In return, I didn't push about the badge or the photograph, waiting for him to volunteer the story when he was ready. Instead, we built something careful between us. A routine that felt almost normal. Me hunting and checking traps. Him taking on more household tasks as his leg allowed, splitting kindling, hauling water from the lake, even attempting to make cornbread that came out dense as river rocks, but made me laugh for the first time in forever. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I said, trying to saw through it with my good knife. You could use this to build a cabin. That bad? He grinned, and the expression transformed his whole face, made him look younger, less haunted. Worse, but I appreciate the effort. It was the small things that surprised me. How he'd carved a wooden spoon to replace my cracked one. How he always made sure the coffee was hot before I woke. How he'd started a new carving project, working on it by firelight when he thought I wasn't watching. One evening, he held it out to me, a small wooden doll, crude but recognizable, with a simple dress and flowing hair. My breath caught. Where did you notice the one on your mantel? He said, voice uncertain. Thought you might like another. If it upsets you, I can stop. I couldn't speak past the sudden tightness in my chest. Turned to the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape while I fought for composure. Her name was Lucy, I finally said, back still to him. She was 5 when the fire took her. And Robert, my husband, The words came easier now. I was in town selling my herbs, saw the smoke from miles away, but by the time I reached home, my voice broke. There was nothing I could do. Just stand there and watch it burn. Ethan didn't touch me, just stood beside me at the window. I was a U.S. Marshal in Dakota Territory, he said quietly, investigating suspicious fires along the railroad expansion. Isabella was my sister. She died in a fire very similar to the one that took your family. I turned to him. The newspaper clipping. The photograph. He nodded. The fires follow a pattern. Small homesteads. Family farms. Places where large companies want the land. And they all happen the same way. Like accidents, but too many to be coincidence. You think my fire wasn't an accident? I think it's possible. His gray eyes held mine steady. What I know is Echo Ridge Timber Company's been buying up land all around this lake. And you're the last holdout. Hammond, I whispered. Before Ethan could respond, we both heard it. The sound of horses approaching. Multiple riders, moving deliberate up the trail toward my cabin. I grabbed my rifle. Through the window, I counted 5 men. Victor Hammond rode at the front, his silver-streaked hair catching the late afternoon light. And beside him, on a pinto horse, sat a man with a light-colored hat and eyes so pale they looked almost colorless. Ethan's whole body went rigid. The other man, medium build, riding the pinto. What about him? His voice came out flat, dangerous. That's Francis Reed, the man I've been hunting for 2 years. The man who killed Isabella. My hands tightened on the rifle as understanding crashed through me like an avalanche. The man who'd burned Ethan's sister to death was the same man who'd murdered my family, and he was standing on my porch, smiling. Hammond dismounted with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. His boots hit my porch like he had every right to be there. "Mrs. Winters," he called, voice carrying that refined Eastern accent that made my skin crawl. "A pleasure to see you again. I see you have company." I stepped onto the porch, rifle held casual but visible. "State your business, Hammond. You're trespassing." "Trespassing?" He smiled, cold as January ice. "I'm here as a concerned citizen, Mrs. Winters. One of my employees was assaulted last night by a man matching your guest's description. The territorial authorities take a dim view of such lawlessness." Behind me, I heard Ethan's uneven step as he joined me at the door, hand resting near his revolver. Hammond's eyes flicked to him. "You must be the mysterious stranger. I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "No pleasure to be had," Ethan replied flat. The pale-eyed man on the pinto, Reed, finally spoke, his voice oddly soft. "Beautiful land you have here, Mrs. Winters. Would be a shame if something happened to it." Ice ran down my spine. Those washed-out blue eyes held nothing. No warmth, no humanity. Just cold calculation, like a snake deciding whether to strike. "I came with a renewed offer," Hammond continued, pulling a folded document from his coat. $25,000 for your land. More than generous, I think you'll agree. And if I refuse? Then, unfortunately, there might be another tragic accident." Hammond shrugged like he was discussing the weather. "Cabin fires are so common in these remote areas. No one would question it." The words hung in the frozen air between us. A direct threat, a promise of murder, delivered casual as a Sunday sermon. "Like the fire that killed my husband and daughter," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "The one your man Reed set 3 years ago on your orders." Hammond's mask slipped for just a second. Surprise, then calculation. Reed merely smiled that empty, terrible smile. "Careful, Mrs. Winters," Hammond said, recovering. "Accusations of that nature could be considered slander. I'd hate to see legal troubles compound your situation. It's not slander if it's true." I raised my rifle slightly. "Dr. Montgomery saw Reed leaving our property the night of the fire, found the incendiary devices he left behind. Evidence the territorial marshals will find very interesting when they arrive tomorrow." This hit home. Hammond's composure cracked, his gaze darting to Reed. It was all the confirmation I needed. "Whatever Montgomery claims to have seen," Hammond said tightly, "would be the unreliable testimony of one man against the word of a respected businessman. The territorial judge is a personal friend." "Judge Patterson?" A new voice cut through the tension. We all turned. Dr. Montgomery stood at the edge of the clearing, having approached on foot through the trees. His medical bag hung from one hand, but his other gripped a shotgun. Judge Patterson retired last month, Hammond, Montgomery continued, stepping forward. His replacement is Judge Whitmore from Helena. They say he can't be bought. The doctor's voice shook, but he held his ground. And I'll testify about what I saw that night, about the fire-starting kit I found, about everything. Hammond's face went red. You'll regret this, Montgomery. Your practice can go to hell along with you, the doctor interrupted. I've carried this shame for 3 years. I won't carry it another day. Two more figures emerged from the tree line. Jacob Wilson, his Union sharpshooter rifle cradled easy in his arms, and young Deputy Collins, hand resting on his sidearm. Mrs. Winters, Collins said, voice formal but determined. I'm here in my capacity as deputy. These men threatening you? Hammond's expression turned murderous. This is outrageous. I'm a respected— I heard the threats, Collins cut him off. About fires, about accidents, and I'm curious about these incendiary devices Dr. Montgomery mentioned. His young eyes hardened. My brother died in a fire at your lumber camp, Mr. Hammond. Safety concerns he'd reported were ignored. Reed's hand moved toward his gun. I wouldn't, Jacob said quietly, his rifle now aimed steady at Reed's chest. I can still hit a fly at 100 yards. Your hand's a much bigger target. For a long moment, nobody moved. 6 of us standing in the snow, death hanging in the air like fog. Finally, Hammond remounted his horse, movements sharp with rage. This isn't over, not by a long shot. No, Ethan said, his voice carrying the weight of 2 years hunting killers. It's not, but it will be, soon. Hammond and his men retreated, but Reed turned in his saddle, those empty eyes finding mine with unsettling accuracy. He touched his hat brim in mock courtesy, that terrible smile still playing at his lips. As they disappeared into the trees, Jacob lowered his rifle. He'll be back, tonight, most likely. With more men. Let him come, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. This is my land, where my family's buried. If Hammond wants it, he'll have to kill me first. Montgomery stepped forward, face pale but resolved. Then we'd best prepare, because I don't think he's bluffing anymore. The afternoon sun was already sinking toward the mountains, darkness coming early as it does in winter. We had maybe 3 hours until nightfall, 3 hours to prepare for war. We worked like the damned trying to outrun judgment. Jacob and I boarded up the vulnerable windows while Ethan, legs still stiff but serviceable, created firing positions behind overturned furniture. Montgomery rode back to town for more ammunition and to alert anyone else who might stand with us. Deputy Collins positioned himself in the root cellar, where a narrow tunnel gave him a clear shot at anyone approaching from the lakeside. Hammond'll come at us from multiple angles, Ethan said, checking his revolver with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd been in too many gunfights. He won't risk a frontal assault, not his style. Then what? I asked, measuring out black powder with steady hands despite the fear coiling in my gut. Fire. His gray eyes met mine. It's Reed's specialty, and it sends a message to anyone else who might resist Hammond. The word hung between us. Fire. The thing that had taken everything from both of us once already. I moved to the mantel, touching Lucy's charred doll with one finger. Then we stop him before he lights the match. Martha Wilson arrived as the sun touched the mountain peaks, her wagon loaded with food and medical supplies. Her weathered face was set with determination as she began organizing, bandages here, water buckets there, dried meat and hardtack in case we were pinned down for days. Jacob told me not to come, she said, hands never stopping their work. Said it was too dangerous for a woman my age, she snorted. I told him I didn't survive childbirth 6 times, 2 Indian raids, and a grizzly attack just to hide when my friends needed help. Despite everything, I felt warmth spread through my chest. For 3 years, I'd been alone. Now, people were risking their lives to stand beside me. The first sign came just after dark. Dogs barking in the distance, down toward Echo Ridge. Not the usual territorial squabbling, but alarm bells of warning traveling up the valley like a wave. Jacob cocked his head, listening. That's the Hendersons' hound, and the Morrisons' dogs past that. He looked at me. They're coming. Whole line of them, moving up from town. My hands tightened on my rifle. How many? Enough. The second sign was the wolves. They started howling from the ridge above the cabin, long, mournful calls that raised every hair on my neck. In all my years here, I'd never heard them sound like that. Like they were mourning something already dead. Even the animals know, Martha whispered, crossing herself. The third sign was the wind. It picked up sudden and fierce, rattling the shutters and moaning through the pines like something alive and angry. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath inside the cabin despite the roaring fire in the hearth. Storm coming, Ethan said, peering through a gap in the boards. Bad one. Good, Jacob muttered. Let Hammond try to burn us out in a blizzard. But I knew better. Knew it in my bones the way you know winter's coming. Reed wouldn't let a little snow stop him. Men like that didn't stop until they were stopped permanent. Martha lit the oil lamps, and their golden glow pushed back the darkness encroaching from every corner. She began heating water, preparing for wounded, always assuming there'd be wounded to tend. Grace, she said softly, not looking up from her work. If things go bad, they won't. But if they do... Her eyes found mine, kind but unflinching. You get out. Through the tunnel, through the woods, however you can. Don't die for a piece of land. It's not about the land, I said. Not anymore. She nodded, understanding. It was about standing up, about refusing to run, about looking evil in the face and saying no, this far and no further. Deputy Collins called out from the root cellar, voice tight. Movement! East side, coming through the trees! We all froze, listening. At first, nothing. Just wind and wolves and the frantic beating of my own heart. Then I heard it, the jingle of tack, the creak of saddle leather, the low murmur of many voices. And underneath it all, the distinctive sound of metal clanking against metal. Torches. They were carrying torches. Through the cracks in the boarded windows, I saw them emerge from the tree line. 20 men, maybe more, spreading out in a loose semicircle around my cabin. Their torches painted the snow orange, turning the white landscape into something hellish. Victor Hammond sat his horse at the center, and beside him, Francis Reed held a torch in one hand and something else in the other, a small leather pouch I recognized from the evidence Montgomery had saved. More fire-starting materials, more death in a bag. Mrs. Winters, Hammond's voice carried across the clearing. Last chance. Sign the deed, or we burn you out. You have 5 minutes to decide. Martha gripped my arm. Grace? No. My voice came out harder than I intended. We don't negotiate with murderers. Ethan moved beside me, and without speaking, his hand found mine, squeezed once, together. Outside, Reed began walking toward the cabin, torch held high, that empty smile on his face. Behind him, Hammond checked his pocket watch. 4 minutes, Mrs. Winters. Then we see how well your cabin burns. The wind howled louder, and the first snowflakes began to fall. But I could already smell it, the sharp chemical scent of coal oil. Reed was already soaking the woodshed. Wait. Ethan's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He was staring out the window, not at the mob, but past them, toward the main road leading into Echo Ridge. What is it? Jacob moved beside him. More riders, coming fast. My heart sank. Reinforcements for Hammond. We were already outnumbered 3-1. More men would make this a slaughter. But as the riders emerged into the torchlight, Hammond's expression twisted from confidence to confusion. Sheriff Taggart rode at the head of a dozen men, not Hammond's loggers, but townsfolk I recognized. The blacksmith, the livery owner, Old Man Henderson, whose son Hammond had crippled. They carried rifles, and their faces held the hard determination of men who'd finally had enough. Behind them came something even more unexpected, a wagon bearing 2 men in territorial marshal uniforms. The marshals, Montgomery breathed from beside me. They came early. Hammond wheeled his horse to face the sheriff. Taggart, what the hell is this? I gave you explicit orders. You don't give me orders anymore, Hammond. The sheriff's voice carried across the clearing, cold and final. Not since I found out what you did to my nephew in that logging camp. One of the territorial marshals dismounted, a tall man with iron gray hair and a badge that caught the torchlight. Victor Hammond, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and about a dozen other charges I'll enjoy reading to you at the courthouse. This is outrageous. Hammond's facade cracked completely. I own this territory. The Judge Whitmore, don't take bribes. The marshal cut him off. And he's got a particular fondness for prosecuting Eastern timber barons who think they can buy Western justice. Reed's hand moved toward his gun. Don't. Jacob's rifle swung smoothly to cover him. I'm hoping you'll try. Save the territory the cost of a trial. For a long moment, everything hung in balance. 20 men with torches against a dozen with righteousness and the law on their side. Then one of Hammond's loggers threw down his torch. I ain't hanging for murder, not for any amount of money. 2 more followed, then 5. Within seconds, half of Hammond's army had dropped their torches in the snow and backed away, hands raised. Hammond's face went purple with rage. Cowards, all of you! The territorial marshal produced handcuffs. Mr. Hammond, you can come peaceful or you can come hard. Your choice. As they led Hammond away, still cursing, still threatening lawyers and judges and anyone who'd listen, Reed remained motionless on his horse. Those pale, empty eyes found mine across the distance. Another time, Mrs. Winters, he said softly, then spurred his horse into the darkness before anyone could stop him. Let him go, the second marshal said. We know who he is now. There's nowhere he can hide, we won't find him. But I knew better. Men like Reed didn't hide. They hunted. The cabin slowly emptied as the crisis passed. Sheriff Taggart took statements. The marshal secured Hammond's men. Martha fussed over a few minor injuries. One logger had been trampled in the chaos. Another had burned his hand on a dropped torch. By midnight, only Ethan and I remained, sitting by the fire while the storm that had threatened finally broke outside. Snow fell thick and fast, covering the trampled earth, the discarded torches, all evidence of how close we'd come to burning. You should try to sleep, I said, noticing how pale he'd gone. The excitement had taken its toll on his healing body. Can't. He stared into the flames. Every time I close my eyes, I see Isabella. See the fire that took her. His voice dropped. See Lucy and Robert. Children I never met, but feel like I knew. I moved to sit beside him on the floor, our backs against the stone hearth. Tell me about her. Your sister. He was quiet so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was going to be a teacher, believed education was the key to civilizing the frontier. A sad smile touched his lips. Used to say books could build civilization faster than railroads. She sounds remarkable. She was. His hand found mine in the space between us, fingers threading through mine like they'd been doing it for years instead of hours. Grace, I need to tell you something. About why I came here. You were tracking Reed. Yes, but... He hesitated. When I found reports of your fire, saw the similarities to Isabella's death, I came looking. Not for you specifically, but for another victim. Another family destroyed by Hammond's greed. His thumb traced circles on my palm, a gesture so gentle it made my throat tight. I didn't expect to find someone who'd understand, who'd lived through the same hell and somehow survived it. Surviving's not the same as living, I said quietly. No. He turned to face me fully. But maybe we could learn the difference. Together. The word hung between us. Together. The same word we'd used when preparing our defenses. But now, it meant something different. Something that terrified me more than 20 men with torches. Ethan, I can't. My hand moved to the leather cord around my neck, to Robert's ring. It's only been 3 years. What would people think? Since when do you care what people think? He had me there. I laughed despite myself, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. My husband died in a fire, I said. My daughter died in a fire. And here you are, a man who spent 2 years chasing the flames that killed his sister. I met his eyes. Maybe we're both too haunted to build anything that isn't cursed from the start. Ethan's free hand came up to cup my face, thumb gentle against my cheekbone. Or maybe we're the only two people in the territory who understand that ghosts don't have to be enemies. They can be companions, reminders of what we're fighting to protect. Before I could respond, pounding came at the door, urgent, desperate. I grabbed my rifle, but it was Deputy Collins, his young face sheet white in the lamplight. Mrs. Winters, Marshal Wolf, we got a problem. What kind of problem? Reed didn't run. He circled back, hit the Wilson place. Collins's voice cracked. Set fire to their barn. Jacob got Martha out, but he swallowed hard. The store in town's burning too. And the Henderson's house. He's torching everyone who stood with you tonight. The warmth drained from my body, replaced by ice-cold certainty. Reed wasn't running. He was sending a message. Ethan was already on his feet, strapping on his gun belt despite the pain that flashed across his face. How long ago? Wilson's barn, maybe 20 minutes. The fires in town just started. Then he's still there. Ethan's expression went hard, the lawman replacing the gentle man who'd held my hand moments before. Probably watching to see who comes to help. It's what he does. Waits for the crowds, enjoys the chaos. I understood with sick clarity. Reed had been denied his spectacle at my cabin. So he'd created a bigger one. Multiple fires, multiple victims, maximum terror. And he'd be there somewhere in the shadows, watching Echo Ridge burn. We end this tonight, I said, loading my rifle with hands that no longer trembled. No more running, no more hiding. Martha Wilson had stood by me when no one else would. Jacob had risked his life for mine. I wouldn't let them burn while I stayed safe in my cabin. Ethan met my eyes, and in that look passed complete understanding. We were both done surviving, done letting the past chain us to grief and fear. Tonight, we'd finally face the flames, or die trying. The ride into Echo Ridge felt like descending into hell itself. Orange light painted the night sky long before we crested the ridge overlooking town. 3 separate fires blazed: the general store, the Henderson house, and what looked like the lumber mill office where Hammond had conducted his business. Jesus Christ, Collins breathed. He's burning the whole damn town. A bucket brigade had formed along Main Street, townsfolk passing water from the public well in a desperate attempt to save what they could. But the fires were too big, too hot, spreading faster than human hands could stop them. Ethan pulled his horse up short, scanning the chaos with the practiced eye of a hunter. He's here, watching, probably from high ground where he can see everything. The church steeple, I said, sudden certainty flooding through me. It's the tallest building, overlooks the whole town. That's where I'd be. We split up, Collins to help with the bucket brigade and keep order, Ethan and I moving quiet through the side streets toward the white clapboard church at the north end of town. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands stayed steady on my rifle. The church door stood open, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, darkness and the faint smell of old hymn books and candle wax. "Reed!" Ethan called out. "It's over! Hammond's arrested! The marshals know everything!" Silence. Then, from above, that soft voice that haunted my nightmares. "Nothing's over, Marshal Wolf. I'm just getting started." A gunshot split the darkness. Ethan jerked backward, and I saw blood blossom on his shoulder, the same arm that had been torn by wolves, barely healed. "No!" I fired blindly toward the sound, heard Reed laugh as he moved through the bell tower above us. "Grace, go!" Ethan gasped, pressing his hand against the wound. "Get out of here." "Like hell." I dragged him behind a pew, my mind racing. Reed had the high ground, could pick us off easy if we tried to run. We were trapped. Then I heard it, footsteps on the church steps, multiple sets. Reed heard them too. His movement above us went silent. The door crashed open, and I swung my rifle around, expecting Reed's men. But it was Dr. Montgomery who stood there, shotgun in hand. And behind him, a dozen more townsfolk, armed and grim-faced. Martha Wilson carried a rifle that looked older than she was. Old Man Henderson had a Navy Colt that probably dated from the Mexican War. Even the baker, still wearing his flour-dusted apron, gripped a fowling piece. "Heard shots," Montgomery said simply. Figured you might need help. He's in the bell tower, I said, voice shaking with relief. He shot Ethan. Montgomery moved to tend Ethan while Martha positioned herself at my side. That bastard burned my barn, she said conversationally. Jacob's madder than a wet hen, says he's going to string Reed up by his own intestines. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Reed, Montgomery called up into the darkness. You're surrounded. Come down peaceful or we'll burn you out. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Burn me? Reed's laugh echoed down. You don't have the stones, old man. None of you do. You're sheep, always have been. Maybe, Montgomery agreed. But we're sheep who've had enough of wolves. What happened next, I didn't expect. Sheriff Taggart entered the church, but he wasn't alone. He was half dragging, half carrying a man in fine Eastern clothes, Victor Hammond, still in handcuffs. Hammond, Taggart said loudly, you got something to say to your hired killer? Hammond's face was ashen, all his earlier bluster gone. Reed, listen to me. There's no money worth hanging for. Come down. We'll make a deal with the marshals. A deal? Reed's voice went cold. You think I do this for money? You stupid, arrogant... He laughed again, and this time there was madness in it. I've been burning things since I was 12 years old, Hammond. Long before you started paying me. You were just an excuse to do what I love. The church went silent. Even Hammond looked horrified, finally understanding what he'd unleashed. Reed, I called up, surprising myself. You killed my daughter. She was 5 years old. Her name was Lucy. I remember. His voice held no remorse. She was crying for her mama when the smoke took her. White-hot rage surged through me, but Martha's hand on my arm held me steady. You took everything from me, I continued, voice shaking. But you didn't break me, and you won't break this town. We're done being afraid of you. For a long moment, silence. Then Reed spoke again, but different now, softer, almost curious. You want to know something funny, Mrs. Winters? Your fire was supposed to be quick, in and out, no suffering. But that night, something went wrong with the timing, and I heard them screaming, your husband calling for you, your little girl. He paused. It was beautiful. I raised my rifle, but Ethan caught my arm with his good hand. Don't. He wants you to come up there. Wants you close. He's right, Montgomery said. Reed's cornered. He'll either surrender or... The sound of breaking glass cut him off. Through the church windows, we saw flames suddenly leaping from the parsonage next door. Reed had thrown something, another fire device. That's the preacher's house, Martha gasped. His wife and baby are in there. The bucket brigade was already exhausted, the town's water supply running low. If that fire spread, it would take the whole north end of Echo Ridge. Reed's laughter drifted down from the bell tower. Let it burn. Let it all burn. And I realized with cold certainty, he wasn't planning to come down. He was planning to burn the church with all of us inside, taking as many to hell as he could. Get everyone out, I shouted. The church, Reed's going to burn it with us inside. But even as the townsfolk scrambled for the exits, Reed's voice drifted down, cold and amused. Too late. Smoke began seeping through the floorboards from below. The bastard had set the church basement on fire before climbing to the bell tower. We'd walked right into his trap. The parsonage first, Montgomery ordered. Save the baby. Half the crowd surged toward the burning house next door, while the rest of us faced an impossible choice. Pursue Reed up the narrow bell tower stairs where he could pick us off one by one, or flee and let him escape in the chaos. Ethan struggled to his feet, face pale from blood loss. Grace, take the others. Get out. Not without you. I gripped his good arm. We finished this together, remember? The smoke thickened. Through the haze, I saw flames licking up the walls near the altar. Reed must have soaked the whole building before we arrived. He'd planned this, planned to make it his funeral pyre and ours. There, Martha pointed. Through the smoke, we glimpsed Reed descending from the bell tower, moving like a ghost through the burning church. He wasn't trapped up there after all. There must be another way down. He emerged near the back entrance, and for one moment, we stood facing each other across the burning sanctuary. His pale eyes reflected the flames, making him look demonic. "You should have sold when you had the chance, Mrs. Winters," he said, almost conversational. "None of this had to happen. You murdered my family." My rifle came up, sighted on his chest. "For a piece of land. For money." "No." He smiled that empty smile. "I murdered them because Hammond paid me. But I enjoyed it because that's who I am. And I'll keep doing it until someone stops me." His hand moved toward his gun. "Think you're that someone?" "No." Ethan's voice came from beside me, strong despite his wound. "We are." The church groaned as a support beam cracked overhead. We had seconds, maybe less. Reed drew. I fired. So did Ethan, Martha, Montgomery. Half a dozen shots that turned the sanctuary into thunder. Reed jerked backward, blood blooming across his chest, his shoulder, his leg. He stumbled against the burning wall, shock finally registering on that empty face. "You," he gasped, sliding down to the floor. "You actually—" Another beam crashed down, separating us from Reed with a wall of flame. Through the fire, I saw him trying to crawl toward the door, but his strength was failing. "Leave him!" Sheriff Taggart grabbed my arm. "The whole building's coming down!" We ran. The night air hit my lungs like ice after the smoke, and I collapsed on the church lawn, coughing, watching the building burn. The steeple collapsed inward with a scream of tortured wood, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Reed was inside. This time, the fire would claim its maker. "The baby!" someone shouted. I turned to see the preacher's wife stumbling from the parsonage, her infant clutched to her chest, surrounded by the bucket brigade who'd managed to contain that fire. The woman fell to her knees, sobbing with relief, and Martha was there immediately, wrapping them both in a blanket. All around me, Echo Ridge burned, but its people stood together, fighting the flames, saving what could be saved. And for the first time since my own family burned, I understood something. Fire could destroy, but it could also forge, temper, strengthen. Ethan sank down beside me, Montgomery already working to bandage his shoulder. "Is it over?" he asked quietly. I watched the church collapse completely. Prayed Reed was truly dead this time. "I think so." Dawn broke cold and clear over Echo Ridge. The fires were out, reduced to smoking ruins. The general store was gone. The church was gone. 3 houses, including the Hendersons, had burned to foundations. But the rest of the town stood, saved by buckets and determination and sheer stubborn refusal to let evil win. The territorial marshals had secured Hammond in the jail. They'd also found evidence in his office before it burned, ledgers showing payments to Reed, correspondence with other business associates across 3 territories. Enough to hang him twice over. But there was one problem. "We need Reed's body," the senior marshal, Thompson, explained to the crowd gathered on Main Street. "For the trial, physical evidence that he's dead, that he can't hurt anyone else. Without it, Hammond's lawyers will claim Reed acted alone, that Hammond knew nothing." "The church is still too hot to search," Montgomery said. "Could be days before we can sift through the ashes safely." "We don't have days," Thompson replied grimly. Now, Hammond's already demanding his lawyer, some fancy Eastern attorney who'll be here on the afternoon train. Once he arrives, things get complicated. I felt sick. After everything, Reed might still win from beyond the grave. Then a voice cut through the crowd. "I can testify." We all turned. Victor Hammond stood in the jailhouse doorway, still in handcuffs, Sheriff Taggart beside him. The timber baron looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, face haggard, eyes sunken. "What?" Thompson said sharply. "I'll testify." Hammond's voice was hollow. "Everything. The fires, the payments to Reed, all of it. I'll make a full confession." Silence fell over Main Street. This was the last thing anyone expected. "Why?" I asked, finding my voice. "Why would you do that?" Hammond's eyes found mine, and for the first time, I saw something human there, something like shame. "Because I heard what he said. About your daughter. About enjoying—" He couldn't finish. "I thought I was building an empire, thought the ends justified the means, but I hired a monster, unleashed him, and last night, watching him burn the town, watching him laugh about a child's death." He shook his head. "I can't carry that, won't." Your lawyer will tell you to stay silent, Thompson said carefully. To hell with my lawyer. Hammond straightened slightly. I'm a lot of things, Marshal. Greedy, ruthless, probably going to hell. But I'm not. He gestured vaguely toward the burned church. I'm not that. I won't be remembered as the man who enabled that. Thompson exchanged glances with his fellow marshal. If you testify fully, cooperate completely, the territorial governor might consider reducing your sentence, 20 years instead of hanging. I don't want a reduced sentence. Hammond's voice was firm. I want to tell the truth. Let the court decide what I deserve. The crowd murmured, uncertain how to process this. The villain asking for justice against himself. There's precedent, Montgomery said quietly. Old mining camp law. If a man confesses fully and submits to judgment willingly, the community can appeal for mercy, not forgiveness, never that, but acknowledgement that even bad men can choose right in the end. Blood debt, Old Man Henderson added. My grandfather's people had a version. A man who causes death but comes forward honest, he pays with years of his life in service, makes restitution. Thompson considered this. The territorial court would have to approve, but with Hammond's testimony, we can shut down his whole operation, save other towns from Reed's replacements. I looked at Hammond, truly looked at him. He was still the man who'd ordered my family killed, still responsible for Robert and Lucy's deaths. But he was also standing here, destroying himself, to make sure Reed's evil was fully exposed. It wasn't forgiveness. Could never be forgiveness. But maybe it was something almost as important. Accountability. Choice. A bad man choosing to be less bad, even when it cost him everything. Grace? Ethan's hand found mine. What do you think? Everyone waited. The widow who'd lost the most. The woman Hammond had tried to burn out of her home just hours ago. I thought about Lucy. About what I'd want her to learn if she'd lived. About justice versus vengeance. About the difference between punishing evil and becoming it. I think, I said slowly, that Hammond should testify, should tell everything, and then face whatever judgment the court decides. I met his eyes across the distance. But not for mercy, for truth. So no other families burn. Hammond nodded, something like relief crossing his face. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said coldly. You're still going to prison. You're still going to pay. But at least you'll do it honest. Thompson made his decision. All right. We'll transport Hammond to the territorial courthouse today. Full testimony, full cooperation. He looked at Hammond. You understand this means life in prison, most likely, no chance of pardon. I understand. As they led Hammond away, the crowd slowly dispersed, heading back to begin the long work of rebuilding. But Martha pulled me aside, tears in her weathered eyes. That took more strength than shooting him would have, she said softly. I wanted to shoot him, I admitted. Part of me still does. I know, but you chose different, chose truth over vengeance. She squeezed my hand. Lucy would be proud. I felt tears sting my own eyes then, the first I'd shed since the fire 3 years ago. Not tears of grief this time, but something more complex. Release, maybe, or recognition that justice could mean something besides blood. Ethan appeared beside us, his arm in a proper sling now. The marshals want statements from everyone who witnessed Reed's confession. Could take most of the day. Then we'd better get started, I said. As we walked toward the temporary headquarters the marshals had set up, Ethan spoke quietly. What you did back there, letting Hammond testify instead of demanding his immediate execution, that was the right thing. Was it? I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted blood for blood, fire for fire. Yes. He stopped, turned to face me. Because you proved we're not like them. Not like Hammond, not like Reed. We choose law over revenge, truth over easy answers. His gray eyes held mine. That's how we win. Not by becoming monsters, but by staying human. Somewhere in the ruins of the church, Reed's body lay cooling. The man who'd murdered my family, who'd enjoyed their suffering, was finally, truly gone. And Victor Hammond, the man who'd ordered those murders, was going to spend the rest of his life paying for it. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined 3 years ago, standing in the ashes of my home, swearing vengeance. But maybe it was better. Maybe it was justice. 3 days after the fires, I stood on my porch at dawn, watching spring finally break winter's grip on the land. The lake ice had fractured overnight, great sheets of it grinding and groaning as they broke apart. Water, dark and alive, showed through the cracks. In another week, the whole surface would be clear, and the world would begin again. I no longer wore Robert's ring around my neck. Instead, it lay buried at the base of a young pine tree by the lake shore, planted like a seed. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but released, allowed to rest. In my hand, I held something new, a letter from the territorial governor, delivered by special courier that morning. Hammond's full testimony had been recorded. The trial was set for May, and based on the evidence, warrants were being issued across 3 territories for Hammond's business associates, other timber barons, railroad men, mining company owners who'd used similar methods. As Reed's death had exposed a rot that ran deeper than any of us knew. "Coffee's ready," Ethan called from inside. His shoulder was healing well, and the limp in his leg had become barely noticeable. In another month, he'd be fit enough to travel if he wanted, but neither of us had mentioned leaving. I found him at the table, reviewing documents the marshals had left, testimony they needed me to verify. As I sat down, my eye caught on a name I recognized. Samuel Montgomery, I read aloud. Witness to suspicious activity, night of February 14th, 1884, the date my family died. He testified yesterday, Ethan said carefully. Told them everything he saw that night, about Reed leaving the property, about the incendiary devices, about, he paused, about something else. My spine stiffened. What else? Ethan slid another document across the table, an affidavit signed by Dr. Montgomery. I, Samuel Montgomery, do hereby swear that on the night of February 14th, 1884, I witnessed Francis Reed departing the Winters property at approximately 1:30 a.m. I also observed a second individual departing the same location approximately 15 minutes prior. My blood went cold as I read the name, Sheriff William Taggart. No, I whispered. That's not possible. Taggart helped us. He arrested Hammond. He was Hammond's man for years, Ethan said gently. Montgomery testified that Taggart was the one who told Hammond about your repeated refusals to sell, who reported when you'd be away from the property, who made sure the town turned against you after the fire so you'd have no support. I felt sick. Sheriff Taggart had stood in this very cabin, expressing sympathy, had attended Robert and Lucy's funeral, had looked me in the eye and lied for 3 years. Why didn't Montgomery say something before? He was afraid. Taggart was the law in Echo Ridge. Who could he tell? Ethan's expression was grim. But when Taggart helped arrest Hammond the other night, Montgomery realized something had shifted, that maybe, finally, there were enough people willing to stand against the corruption. Where's Taggart now? Gone. Disappeared the night Hammond was arrested. The marshals found his office cleaned out, papers burned, safe emptied. He knew the truth would come out eventually. I stood abruptly, needing air. On the porch, I gripped the railing and stared at the breaking ice on the lake. All this time, I'd thought Sheriff Taggart was simply weak, simply bought by Hammond's money. But he'd been complicit, had helped plan my family's murder, and he'd gotten away. The sound of horses drew my attention. A small group was approaching. Martha and Jacob Wilson, Deputy Collins, a handful of other townsfolk. As they dismounted, I saw they carried tools, saws, hammers, lumber. What's all this? I asked. Jacob removed his hat, his weathered face kind. Heard your cabin needed some repairs after the siege. Figured we'd help. And I brought fabric, Martha added, producing a bundle. For curtains. Place could use some brightening up. Church is gone, Old Man Henderson said. But that don't mean community is. We take care of our own. Our own. The words settled around me like a warm coat. For 3 years, I'd been the outcast, the witch in the woods, the widow who wouldn't move on. Now, the same people who'd whispered about me were standing on my porch, offering help, offering belonging. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. After everything, why now? Henderson's expression grew serious. Because we were wrong. Let Hammond and Taggart poison us against you when you were just grieving in your own way. He looked at the others, who nodded agreement. You stood up when the rest of us were too scared. Faced down evil when we'd been bowing to it. Figure that earned some respect and some apologies. Martha stepped forward, eyes bright with tears. I'm sorry, Grace, for not standing with you sooner, for letting you grieve alone. One by one, they echoed her, simple apologies that couldn't undo 3 years of isolation, but were offered honestly nonetheless. I don't need apologies, I said, my own voice thick. But I'll accept the help and the company. As they began unloading supplies, Deputy Collins pulled me aside. He looked younger than his 24 years, uncertainty written across his face. Mrs. Winters, I need to ask you something about the night of the church fire. All right. Reed said something before he died about your fire not being his first in this territory, that he'd been operating here for years before Hammond hired him. Collins hesitated. What if there are others? Other families whose fires weren't accidents? Other people who deserve the truth? The question hung between us. I'd found justice for Robert and Lucy, but how many other families hadn't? How many other accidents had Reed caused before Hammond put him on retainer? The marshals are looking into it, Ethan said, joining us. He held another document, this one a list of suspicious fires across Montana territory over the past decade, dozens of them. They want to know if you'd be willing to help. Your knowledge of the territory, of fire patterns, of— Yes, I interrupted. Whatever you need. Because justice for my family wasn't enough. Not when others still grieved without knowing why. Not when Reed's earlier crimes remained hidden, his victims unnamed. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, I watched my neighbors work together to repair my home. Watched Ethan directing the effort with quiet authority. Watched the ice continue its slow surrender to spring. I'd spent 3 years frozen, trapped in the moment my family died. But standing here now, surrounded by community, holding Ethan's hand, feeling purpose return to my life, I understood something profound. The fire hadn't just taken, it had also forged, made me harder where I needed to be hard, softer where I needed to be soft, strong enough to survive, brave enough to hope. The ring was buried, the ghosts were at peace, and I was finally, truly, ready to live again. But first, there was one more question that needed answering. Where had Sheriff Taggart run to? And who else in Echo Ridge had helped him hide the truth? The trial lasted 3 days. Hammond sat in the defendant's chair, his fine Eastern suit replaced by prison gray, and told the truth. Every payment to Reed, every fire, every family destroyed in the name of profit. The courtroom sat silent as a church while he spoke, except for the scratch of the court reporter's pen and the occasional sob from the gallery. I testified on the second day, telling about Lucy and Robert, about the 3 years I'd spent believing their deaths were random tragedy. Ethan testified about Isabella, Deputy Collins about his brother. One by one, Hammond's victims, the ones who'd survived, stood up and were counted. On the third day, Judge Whitmore delivered his verdict. Victor Hammond, you are guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, arson, fraud, and a list of charges too long to enumerate. The sentence is life imprisonment at hard labor, no possibility of parole. No gasps, no cheers, just quiet acknowledgement that justice, though slow, had finally arrived. But as the marshals led Hammond away, he paused beside my seat in the gallery. Mrs. Winters, he said quietly, I know this changes nothing, but I am sorry, for whatever that's worth. I looked at him, really looked. Saw a man who'd built an empire on ashes and was now paying for it with the rest of his life. A man who'd chosen truth too late to save himself, but maybe in time to save his soul. It's worth something, I said. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. He nodded and was led away. We were halfway back to Echo Ridge when the rider caught up to us. A territorial marshal I didn't recognize, his horse lathered from hard riding. He pulled up beside our wagon, breathing hard. Mrs. Winters? Marshal Wolf? Judge Whitmore sent me. There's been a development. My stomach dropped. What kind of development? Sheriff Taggart. He's been found. Ethan straightened. Where? That's the thing. The marshal looked uncomfortable. He didn't run. He's been at the territorial courthouse in Helena this whole time. Voluntarily turned himself in 2 hours after Hammond was arrested. The world seemed to tilt. What? He gave a full confession. Said he couldn't live with what he'd done, with being complicit in— The marshal glanced at me. In the deaths of innocents. Especially children. I couldn't speak, couldn't process this. There's more, the marshal continued. Taggart brought evidence, documents Hammond thought were destroyed, ledgers showing payments not just to Reed, but to a dozen other men across the territories. Names, dates, locations, everything needed to dismantle Hammond's entire network. Ethan's hand found mine, squeezed. Why didn't anyone tell us? Judge's orders. Wanted to secure Hammond's conviction first, make sure it couldn't be challenged. But now, the marshal pulled out an envelope. Taggart wrote this. Ask that it be delivered to you, Mrs. Winters, after the trial was done. My hands shook as I opened it. Taggart's handwriting, usually so neat, was shaky, uncertain. Mrs. Winters, I have no right to ask your forgiveness. I stood by while Hammond ordered your family killed. I helped him isolate you afterward, turned the town against you to protect myself. I am complicit in murder, and I will pay for that with the rest of my life. But I want you to know, when I saw what Reed was that night at the church, heard him laugh about your daughter's death, something broke in me. I realized I'd become the very thing I swore to fight when I pinned on this badge 30 years ago. I can't undo what was done, but I can make sure every man like Hammond, every killer like Reed, faces justice. The evidence I've provided will bring down operations in 6 territories. Hundreds of families will be saved from what happened to yours. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's all I have left to give. May God forgive me, because I know you cannot. William Taggart. I read it twice, then handed it to Ethan without speaking. He's requesting the maximum sentence, the marshal said. 20 years hard labor, no appeals. And he's asked that his salary be paid to the families of Hammond's victims. For restitution. The sun was setting behind us, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, I could see the smoke rising from Echo Ridge's cook fires, home, community, belonging. What will you do? The marshal asked. The judge wants to know if you'll accept his testimony, his evidence, or if you want him tried separately for his crimes. I thought about justice versus vengeance, about how darkness could break even good men, about how some could find their way back to light, even if only at the very end. Use his testimony, I said finally. Save those families. But he serves every day of that sentence. The marshal nodded and rode off. Ethan put his arm around me as we continued toward home. You gave him grace. No, I shook my head. I gave him justice. Grace is different. Grace is— I paused, searching for words. Grace is what Martha and Jacob showed me. What you showed me. The chance to be more than our worst moments. As we crested the final hill, I saw something that made my breath catch. The cabin, my cabin, blazed with lamplight. But it wasn't alone anymore. A second structure stood beside it, new lumber still golden in the fading light. A workshop, I realized, for Ethan's furniture making. And in the yard between them, a small figure played. Michael, the orphan boy the Wilsons had brought by last week, asking if we'd consider giving him a home. We hadn't decided yet, hadn't known if we were ready. But watching him there, chasing fireflies in the dusk, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope for the future. Not despite the past, but because of it. Because I'd walked through fire and come out changed, but not destroyed. What do you think? Ethan asked softly. About the boy? I watched Michael laugh as a firefly landed on his outstretched hand, his face full of wonder. I think, I said slowly, that Lucy would have liked having a little brother, and Robert would have wanted us to help a child in need. I leaned into Ethan's warmth. I think we have room in our hearts for new love without forgetting the old. Ethan's arm tightened around me. Then let's tell him. Together. Together. The word that had saved us both. As we drove the wagon down to our home, to our family, the first stars appeared overhead. The same stars that had watched me bury my husband and daughter, that had seen me drag a dying Marshall from the snow, that had witnessed everything burn and everything rebuild. They were still there, still watching. And below them, Grace Winters, no longer alone, no longer frozen, finally, truly, came home. Not to the place she'd lost, but to the life she'd found. 1 year later, the territorial governor arrived in Echo Ridge on a spring morning, his carriage kicking up dust that tasted of possibility. I stood on Main Street with Ethan, Michael between us, watching as the governor stepped down. Behind him came reporters from newspapers in Helena, Denver, even San Francisco. "Mrs. Winters," Governor Walsh said, removing his hat. "Or should I say, Mrs. Wolf?" "Grace is fine," I replied, still getting used to my new name. He smiled. "Grace, then. I've come to present you with something." He gestured, and an aide brought forward a framed document. "By order of the territorial legislature, this land, your land, has been designated the Winters Wolf Nature Preserve, protected in perpetuity, no mining, no logging, no development, just wilderness, as it was meant to be." Tears stung my eyes. Robert and Lucy's grave would never be disturbed, never be sold, never be anything but sacred ground. "There's more," the governor continued. "Thanks to the testimony of William Taggart and Victor Hammond, we've identified and arrested 17 men involved in similar schemes across 6 territories. Over 100 families have been saved from what happened to yours." He paused, his expression growing solemn. "This doesn't bring back those you lost. Nothing can. But perhaps it gives their deaths meaning, purpose." I looked at Ethan, at Michael, at the town that had finally become home, at the mountains rising behind us, eternal and enduring. "It does," I said. "It truly does." That night I walked to the lake shore where Robert's ring lay buried. The pine tree had grown taller, its needles thick and healthy. I placed my hand against its bark and spoke to the ghosts who lived there still. "I hope you're proud. I hope you understand. I haven't forgotten you. Never will. But I've learned to live again, to love again, to hope again." The wind rustled through the pines, and I chose to hear it as answer. "Yes. Live. That's all we ever wanted for you." Ethan appeared beside me, Michael running ahead to skip stones across the darkening water. "Ready?" Ethan asked. I took his hand, scarred from woodworking, strong, alive, and turned toward the lights of home. "Ready." And together, we walked into the future. You know, folks, I've told a lot of stories in my time. Stories about hard men and harder times, about loss that cuts so deep you think you'll never stand straight again. But Grace Winter's story, well, that one's different. See, she could have let the bitterness win, could have spent the rest of her days alone in that cabin, nursing her rage like a fire that never quite goes out. Lord knows, she had every right to. When a man loses his family the way she did, when evil comes knocking in the night and takes everything that matters, there ain't no shame in wanting blood for blood. But Grace chose different. She chose to stand up when standing up meant risking everything all over again. Yet she chose to save a dying stranger when she could have bolted that door. She chose justice over vengeance, even when vengeance would have felt a whole lot better in the moment. And you want to know what I learned from her story? What I hope you'll take with you? It's this. Dignity is worth more than blood. Always has been. Always will be. And family, real family, ain't just who you're born to. It's who you choose. Who stands beside you when the wolves are circling. Who helps you rebuild when everything's burned down. Justice might be slow, might be silent sometimes, but it never forgets. Not really. Truth has a way of coming out, even years later. Even when you think evil's won for good. If you've ever lost someone and wondered if you're allowed to love again, you are. If you've ever stood alone against something bigger than you, you're braver than you know. If you've ever carried guilt for years, wondering if it's too late to make things right, it's not. Never is. Grace Winters buried her husband's ring under a pine tree and chose to live again. Not because she forgot, but because she understood something we all need to learn. The best way to honor the dead is to live well, to love hard, to stand for what's right, even when it costs you everything. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains. The kind of dignity that can't be bought or sold or burned away. That's the kind of person I hope we all choose to be. Now, I'd like to hear from you folks out there listening. Where are you tonight? What's your story? Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. Whether you're driving a night shift, sitting on your porch watching the stars, or just can't sleep because the world's too heavy sometimes. I want to know. Because stories like Grace's, they're for all of us. They remind us that even in the darkest times, even when the flames are closing in, we can choose to be more than our worst moments. We can choose to be human. We can choose to be good, and that, my friends, makes all the difference. God bless, and I'll see you in the next story.